Welcome to Radio Today broadcasting in Johannesburg on 1485 AM and nationally on DSTV Audio Channel 869.
Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. And I would like to welcome you to Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's really great to be with you. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners. That's Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisen FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. Thanks for all the emails. Do keep sending them. And also just a reminder that you can visit the website www.conversationswithniki. One word, Niki spelled Niki.co.za, and all the shows are podcasts, all the shows are on that website, and you can also communicate with me. You can also follow me on Twitter if you like, at Seberini, or you can go to my Facebook page, which is Conversations with Niki. Now, it's been so much politicking and listening to the radio and reading newspapers and asking the question, are you going to vote? The elections are just around the corner, and all South Africans, well, we hope all South Africans 18 and over will be going to the polls for the general election. And I'm just wondering how you are feeling about that at the moment. I mean, are you excited? Do you think that you're going to be able to change history here in South Africa? Or are you just very disappointed with the status quo, and perhaps maybe it'll just be a lovely day off and you'll be relaxing? Well, I think that possibly just before the election we need to be looking back. We need to be looking at where we've come from and look at where we are today and what we want to create for our future here in South Africa. So we thought of a very interesting way of doing something like that would be through music. We have had a century of struggle. We've had a century of music. And I suppose we should be asking the question, in our country, how has music affected the struggle and vice versa? And, I'm not the person to answer any of those questions, but the music guru is. And I'm so delighted that he's taken time out to share his incredible knowledge when it comes to music, when it comes to the stories behind the music, to look at South Africa, the struggle, the music, and how everything is intertwined. So, Sean Brokensha, welcome to Conversations with Niki, and thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Niki. Hello, out there on the coast. I very rarely get to talk to people on the coast unless it's Cape Town because of my circumstances. But hey, Wild Coast, Natal, this is so cool. My relatives are there. We're talking about my hood.
Your hood. But this isn't new to you. First of all, sitting in the radio, you've done so much. Tell us a little bit about the incredible experience that you have.
Well, I'm currently on 702, and I have a slot on 702, the Music Guru feature. I also present Solid Gold Sunday sometimes, which is a different thing. I'm not confined to that, however. I'm on SAFM occasionally as an analyst. ETV likes to use me. That's generally to discuss important things like Rihanna and Justin Bieber.
Of course.
But
we do need
nonetheless, I suppose I bill myself as a music journalist. I run a website. I'm a consultant to the music industry. I worked on the Mandela movie. Also a live performer. I do shows.
Wow. Plenty. So where did the love of music come from? I mean, did you grow up in a musical family?
Well, I grew up in a family that I suppose our creativity for a while was suppressed because we were very conservative, very Natal, very English. You have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor, that kind of thing. And my dear late dad actually had creative bones in him, which he only confessed to late in life.
Which you never knew about?
No. He was a conservationist. Okay. And then only later on, when I had a show on at the Grahamstown Festival, he snuck in and said, oh, by the way, I used to be a theatre manager and I was trained by the Rank organisation. So that was pretty cool. So I suppose it is genetic. But my love of music comes from, imagine a journey in time and space. There's a kid of about 12 under the duvet on a sweaty Durban Friday night with his torch. It's 11:30. His mother's going, Sean, it's time to go to bed now. I can't. I'm listening to David Gresham and the Bee Gees.
You're reaching for the stars?
Yes, exactly. And the Bee Gees have occupied the top 5 places on the charts. How can I leave my radio now? And I used to write things down. This is very dorky. But nonetheless, I'm very glad I did. I used to write things down in a little notebook. So all the sorry nominees, all the top 20s every week. There's a name for a person like that. You would think
What is that?
it's dork or geek, but it's not.
No.
It's actually grapher. It's a legitimate hobby. And Art Garfunkel is the most famous grapher in history, just to give you some sidebar information. So I always loved music. I'd follow it like some people would follow sport. And where it came from always fascinated me. And the idea that music seems to be listened to on the charts and then almost thrown away and becomes a nostalgia thing. But it's not that. It's only what we see, what the media presents to us. However, music has such a more powerful role in society, and has had for centuries. You know, irrespective of whether it's number one on the charts or not, music has got an undeniable power, and especially in our country. And
well,
that's
I mean,
my point of interest.
you've said that I have an insatiable appetite for the story behind the music I love. And that's what I love, is that story.
Yeah. And I think it goes beyond music, because essentially a storyteller. If you take Dylan Thomas, if you take Bob Dylan, if you take any of the really good hip-hop artists or rap artists like Tupac, they're doing the same thing. Even Eminem, for all his foul-mouthedness, he's telling a story. It's the idea of actually getting people around that fireplace and actually giving them information that's going to both inform them and going to change them and maybe get them thinking as people.
And it is reflective of the times.
Exactly, and life is a story-based experience. We go from one story in our lives to another story in our lives. You know, and as someone else said, life is a long song.
What is music for you? I mean, besides being, you know, really interested in who won what and when the song was written and the story behind it, is music, is it escapism? Is it that particular story that takes you on a journey and then you can't wait to listen or connect with another story? Because, I mean, music is incredible. I mean, it's an incredible trigger. I mean, people listening right now know that you can hear a story, you can be brought to tears in a couple of seconds. You can be jubilant and exuberant within a couple of seconds. You can be taken to the pits of despair listening to other songs. What is it for you, Sean?
I would say all of that and a bag of chips. And by that I mean that it's life itself. It's blood. You know, it's part of us. Our bodies are musical. Our bodies operate on a fluid system. And they're subject to the tides and the moon. There's music, as Neil Diamond observed, there's music in the streets. You know, the sound of the traffic. Everything,
nature.
Everything has rhythm. And we live in a rhythmic world. Music is inherent to what we are. We have tended to put it aside in the face of, I suppose, 20th century capitalism and needing to strive, and I suppose it all started with the Industrial Revolution. But music is still part of our souls. Why do you think you will remember songs in your life and you'll attach them to memories in your life?
For sure.
Someone dying, someone getting married, your first kiss, being refused your first kiss, your first job. There's always a song. It's because the place that you store music in your soul is the same place that you store those indefinable things that can't be counted. Hopes, dreams, love, disappointment, all of that stuff gets put in the same part in your soul. And that's why, to me, music is important, because you can not only unlock things in yourself, and it doesn't really matter what kind of music, as long as it speaks to you. There's some types of music that don't speak to me at all. Don't try acid jazz on me, I'll be lost. Don't try and play me something that tells me it's going to kill me. I'll be lost. But most types of music, if it's done intelligently, helps me as a person. It tells me about myself, but then more broadly it tells me about the society I live in.
Yeah.
And music as a change agent, and music as a record of history, of the ordinary man's history, is very important. And we must never lose sight of its importance.
It's wonderful. Listen, you were working on Mandela Long Walk to Freedom when it came to the music. What was that like? I mean, did you realize what an important role you were playing in terms of the music? Because music can really make or break a movie.
Well, it was a very discombobulated experience, because I did it via the internet and via, it was all happening in Cape Town and I was in Joburg. But my role on that was to find historical music that fitted the period exactly. I mean, the last thing they wanted to do was play a song from the 1960s in the scene in 1946 where Sisulu and Mandela were thrown off the bus in Joburg. You're going to get some dude with a beret and a grey beard is going to stand up and say, "Charlatan!" and there goes your credibility. So, yeah, that's what I did.
Big responsibility. But
big responsibility in that sense, yeah. And also realized that it's a movie people are going to see. We still look at Invictus, for example. We're going to see as part of our history and our culture. And having that small influence on that, It is special to me.
So let's talk about South Africa. Let's talk about the century of struggle, century of music. I mean, is it reflective? Is the music reflective of the struggle that we have experienced in the last century?
Well, to start with the words of our father, the curious beauty of African music is that it uplifts even if it tells a sad tale. You may be poor, you may only have a ramshackle house, you may have lost your job, but the song gives you hope. African music is often about the aspirations of the African. And that's what that Nelson Mandela said that. And I say that music gives us courage in this country. It has given us courage. It's given us common purpose. It's communicated political strategy. It's communicated direct action when none was possible. How do you think news of ANC policy got from Robben Island to the mainland? It was through the choirs. Music played an important underground role. Music in the 70s and the 80s, along with symbolism and dances like the Toy Toy, was actually used as a weapon, as a strategic weapon, far much more than what you'd find on the charts.
Really?
And if I go back to the beginning of the story, it would probably start round about the beginning of the 20th century, where we didn't have protest music and we didn't really have meaningful protest. We had a very polite, I wouldn't call it grumbling, but it was a polite, something is wrong, you can't do this to us as people. The African National Congress started as a very peaceful organization. And the music reflected this idea that you didn't really want to rock the boat too much, but something was wrong. One of the earliest instances of protest music I've found comes from Durban, eThekwini, and it's called Dipping in Durban. And it's a shameful story. In the early part of the 20th century, if you came from rural Natal and you went to Durban and you wanted to work, they would dip you like they dipped cattle to get rid of vermin and lice, and they would dip you in cattle dip, which stings, and they'd use creosote and stuff like that. And so this is a song that came out of it. It's called Idipu eThekwini, Dipping in Durban. And an excerpt goes, what are you people in Durban saying about the dipping? What is chasing people away from Durban? Your fellow countrymen, long live the black nation. Talk on our behalf, John Dube. He was with the ANC at the time. And so you had the first stirrings of protest music. However, it was the Second World War that gave great impetus to both politics and music in this country. Practically in Johannesburg, a lot of middle to lower class young white men went off to fight as soldiers, and they left the jobs they had in the factories and in the mines. And there was suddenly a need for semi-skilled, lower level managerial positions on the mines, as well as workers. And so a lot more migrant workers started coming to Joburg. Now, there had been a stream anyway to work on the gold mines, but they were kept in appalling conditions called slum yards in the lower parts of Joburg, in places like New Doornfontein and Jeppiestown. And they were almost like concentration camp tenements. They're still sitting there at the bottom of the city if you want to go and look at them. They're appalling. Those were our first hostels. Sophiatown was a freehold area, and it had a very unique characteristic in that it was established in the time of Kruger. And for a brief window in South African history, there are certain areas in this country that were given 99-year lease holdings. So anyone could live there for a 99-year period. And Sophiatown was such a place. And so families started pouring into Sophiatown. And it went from being single migrant black workers, male workers, to a community starting to establish. And what a community! Political thought, journalism, music, dancing, philosophy, religion, everything boiled in this cauldron that was Sophiatown. And it was in the face of the nationalist government which had been voted in 1948. And the two had to come into collision. And when the Nats started unrolling apartheid, both grand apartheid and petty apartheid in the 50s, it became clear that Sophiatown had to go. Eventually it was bulldozed in 1960, one of the most cynical and shameful acts in our history. They just destroyed an entire community, cynically called it Triumph, which means triumph. Luckily it's back to being Sophiatown.
But the music that came out of that. The
music that came out of it, and the musicians, Miriam Makeba, Hugh Masekela, anyone you could name that had importance in black South Africa in the 50s, was in Sophiatown at some point. And the song I've chosen to play for you,
Yes.
that I want you to play, comes from Nancy Jacobs and her sisters. That's the actual name of the band. Miriam Makeba also had a hit with it. It's called Meadowlands, written by Strike Valikazi. And it basically complains about the fact that they were being moved in Bedfords in the early hours of the morning to the middle of nowhere and just being dumped in the velds. And it ends off by saying, you'll hear the Tsotsi say, we're not moving, we're staying here. Stay here, my love, stay here.
And here it is, Meadowlands. Well, if you have just tuned in, this is Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini, really happy to be with you. We're having such an interesting story being told through music by music guru Sean Brokensha. We're talking about the history of South Africa. We're talking about the struggle. We're talking about music. And I really hope that you enjoyed that one. Nancy Jacobs, Meadowlands. So Sean, where does the story take us from here?
Well, we had Sophiatown, which was going great guns until it got flattened. But in the broader South African context, the Nationals Party, if anyone's got any respect for them still, was unrolling this policy of apartheid on a big scale and on a little scale. On a big scale, you had things like the Group Areas Act, which said that certain people couldn't live in certain places. You had the Mixed Marriages Act. You had all the various education acts. They passed an act saying that blacks weren't allowed to go to university, for example. Remember, it was Verwoerd's stated policy. Well, for what came later, but it was the nationalist policy, which he was basically just enunciating, that we need an uneducated black workforce. He said those immortal words, what's the use of teaching maths and science to black children? They're not going to use it on the mines. And so it was this chilling reality.
It's a shocker when you hear that, honestly it is.
It's this chilling reality that ordinary people had to face and confront somehow, and one of the ways they definitely did was through music. And a lot of music was suppressed, for obvious reasons. A lot of music happened spontaneously, and a lot of the songs would be a song that would be constant to gatherings, to time, to place, but they would just change the names. You know, if Milan was the Prime Minister at that point, it would be Milan in the shop, in the song. It would be Beware Milan. If Sisulu was prominent in the ANC, Sisulu would be in the song. It just depended on the needs of the time, and so you've had songs that have survived for decades, like Nkosi Sikelel. At one point in our history, it was about the only song that people could sing because it was a hymn. But everyone knew what it was about. And meetings started and ended with Nkosi Sikelel. And it was kind of like if you step forward in time to the Toy Toy. The cops, the white cops, would just listen to this and say, what's going on? In the times of the Toy Toy, they'd say, well, what are these dudes doing jumping around? And they didn't understand what it was.
What
that
they
it was
were
the
actually
ordinary
doing.
man, you know, living his life, communicating what he's doing to his fellows in a very organized way. The ANC Youth League, which was established in the 1960s, started putting symbols to songs, to flags, to slogans. So it started becoming orchestrated. There was a song called Sinzeni Na, which was sung secretly by millions of people. It's a lament which says, you know, what have we done wrong? Our only sin is being born black. How sad is that?
When you talk about sung secretly, when
they would sing
gatherings?
it at underground meetings.
Okay.
They'd sing it in the comfort of their, well, comfort is a relative term here, but they'd sing it in the quietness of their own homes with paraffin lamps. It would be the underground South Africa that we white South Africans never saw, never realized what was happening. And some of the things that happened in the 50s with all of these laws, obviously there was a reaction to these laws. So the pass laws led to the Defiance campaign, where they said we will not carry passes. And that led to the Freedom Charter. That led to the Women's March on the Union buildings. And that also led to music. That song that is ingrained in all of us, especially on Women's Day, You Strike a Woman, You Strike a Rock. That started spontaneously on the steps of the Union buildings in the early hours of the morning in 1956. They didn't really know what to do. All these women had gathered, and a group of domestic workers from Durban started singing the song that they'd made up. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. And the whole crowd took up the song, and it became part of our culture and part of a very informative part of what we are today. 1960, things started to get very sharp point. The PAC had broken away from the main body of the ANC because they wanted to become more militaristic. In 1960, the Sharpeville massacre happened, and that turned the world's attention, not fully, but turned the world's attention to what was happening. Strangely enough, the first sanctions laws were passed by the United Nations in 1962. They just weren't very well upheld. And a lot of things happened because of Sharpeville and the demolition of Sophiatown. Exiles streamed out of this country for reasons of their own safety. Hugh Masekela, Miriam Makeba. And they had
how did that affect their
They
music?
had to leave. And they didn't leave and try and make new lives for themselves in profit and in comfort. They took the struggle with them, and they became campaigners for anti-apartheid. And they enlisted people like Harry Belafonte and started getting an international input into the movement. And the songs obviously started coming thick and fast in reaction to all of this, and the purpose of the songs started to change as the purpose of the politics started to change. They became a more sharp point, less of a lament, more of an urging to do something, get out there and do something. The Nats had said when they'd had the Rivonia trial and they'd imprisoned most of the leadership of the ANC on Robben Island, they triumphantly said to themselves, well, we've cut the head off the snake, nothing can happen now. It didn't. They devised a very clever system of communication. Long-term political prisoners like Mandela, Sisulu, weren't allowed to mix with the rest of the prison population, lesser offenders and younger offenders, only when they had choir practice. So they would teach songs that actually communicated policy.
Really, Sean?
And those songs, when you were released after your 6 months or a year on Robben Island, you would take that song and
no
you would
one
take
knew,
that instruction. No one knew.
the prisoners, of
and
course.
then they'd end up singing these songs to crowds of people in the democratic movement, and they knew what they meant. We are still here. Our leaders are still leading you. We are still devising policy, and this is what we want you to do. So for the next song, I'd like to turn to the Robben Island singers to give it great authenticity. Three former freedom fighters, and they're singing a song called Yazinga. And Yazinga basically says, do something. You know, the backside of the loaf is like concrete, but I want you to get off that backside and do something for the struggle. So it's one of those first songs that started urging action. Here's Yazinga.
Lovely.
Ziqine njengokhonkomo zinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa madu zinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa madu zinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa madu zinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho wezinqa madu zinqa zikamahlalela ziqine njengokhokho.
The Robben Island Prison Singers, Yasinga, calling for action. It's Conversations with Niki. I hope that you are enjoying the show with Sean Brokensha. And we're talking about the history in this wonderful country in which we live, because we do just have an election around the corner. Sean, are you rearing to go in terms of election?
Well, I'm a bit disillusioned by my lack of choice at the moment, to be honest.
You and
but
the rest of the nation.
As a principle, it's like music. You know, I apply the same thought to the music of the ordinary man. It's important. Our vote is also important. We have to actually use it, even if it's difficult for us to use it. So
well, what does Yasinga say? Take action.
Yeah, take action.
Take action.
You know, it's easy
sort
to
of
sit
through
and
your
complain
vote?
and say, okay, well, it's just going down the tubes and in Kandla, etc., blah, blah, Valeme, etc. Yeah, we've heard that song. I've been hearing that song for decades. You know, but you need to do something. And if all you can do is vote, then vote. So that's my opinion on that.
So thank you. Thanks for that, Sean. So where do we move? Where are
well,
we in the story?
We've got to the 60s. And the two people from the 60s and the 70s I'd like to actually pay tribute to, because the danger with history is you tend to a lot of stuff gets forgotten. And there are some very brave people in the history, in our musical and political history, that might be overlooked. First guy is a guy called Chris McGregor. Now, he flew directly in the face of apartheid South Africa. He was a white guy.
I've never heard of Chris McGregor.
Yeah, he's a jazz man. He's a jazz man. And he decided that he was going to play African jazz. And he was going to play to African audiences, and he wasn't going to apologize to anyone. So what he did is he would pretend that he was colored. Here's an excerpt from...
How did he do that?
Here's an excerpt from the magazine The Drum.
And did he stick with Chris McGregor?
And it screams, yeah, it screams, plays colored to play jazz, exclamation mark. And then the whole thing, it says the huge crowd at the Jabuva Jazz Festival was going wild over the slightly built bombshell pianist. Most agreed that he was the hottest jazz man ever to hit South Africa for a long time. But the curious thing to the crowd was that they kept on wondering why he wore a cap that covered most of his head. The reason was simple. The cap was to disguise a shock of unruly brown hair. Hair that would have shouted the fact that he was, and this is in capital letters with a big exclamation mark, white. So you can imagine the scandal there. And he said, I mean, this guy must have had the most unbelievable courage. He said to a journalist, race doesn't matter to me, but for the sake of the promoters, I have to pretend I'm colored. Not that that's anything to do with jazz. And he added, if it would help keep my music and the country's jazz strong, I would not hesitate to be reclassified as a colored. So here's to you, Chris McGregor, if you're around. The other guy is probably one of the most prolific and greatest writers of freedom songs in this country, who very sadly came to a very bad end. Vuyisile Mini, he was a unionist, he was an activist, he was a singer, and he was one of the very first ANC members to be executed by the apartheid government. And he wrote a lexicon of really amazing and powerful songs in the 70s primarily, 60s and the 70s. So just pay tribute to those two guys. And there's another person that I must remember from the 70s, and that would be Stephen Bantu Biko.
Of course.
Who drove the concept of black consciousness, of black pride in this country. He wasn't an ANC member. He was a member of the PAC. But nonetheless, he did the most incredible things for the struggle, just because of his courage, his words, his example. And I think we know the story of Stephen Biko and how he came to grief in Motherwell, and how the cops beat him to the point of almost death, and they tried to drive him to Pretoria, and he died on the way. And that story gained the attention. Now this helps me segue into international attention. It gained the attention of a guy called Peter Gabriel. He was originally with a band called Genesis, but a very political fellow. And he wrote a song, also from a movie, called Biko. He wrote a song actually called Cry Freedom. The song's called Biko, and it describes that horrific incident. And it's just to prove to you that not only the grassroots music had an influence on our country, but by the time you got to the 70s and the 80s, it started trickling through internationally, and people started becoming aware. Now, Sharpeville made people aware that South Africa even existed. The Soweto riots in 1976 suddenly made it actually big news internationally, and things started gaining intensity on all fronts. So, Peter Gabriel and Biko.
And let's just take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Well, welcome. This is Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners, Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisner FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. We are having a very, very interesting discussion on Conversations with Niki. We're looking at South Africa, the history of this incredible country, and the music that has accompanied us along this road, this struggle. And I would say this rebirth as well. I have music guru in the studio, Sean Brokensha, who's just so beautifully explaining the history and how the music is attached and intertwined in that story. And we're up to the untimely and brutal murder of Steve Biko, and how this got the attention of the international world. And Peter Gabriel wrote a song, Biko. So we were about to listen to that song.
And the call did go out in this country, the man is dead, the man is dead. That was Peter Gabriel, his tribute to Stephen Bantu Biko, who was beaten to death by the apartheid government. And we've got to, I suppose we've got to the Soweto riots in 1976, where the youth actually took up the chalice, and they took up the torch, and they showed their elders, you know, they showed a complete fearlessness. And school kids took on policemen, heavily armed policemen, with dogs, with tear gas, with water cannons, with weapons, with army to support them, and they gave their lives. But that's the 76 riots changed this country inexorably in a lot of ways. One of the spin-offs is we got TV. Forster said we have to have TV to try and counter the adverse publicity we're getting overseas. So suddenly he commanded that the SABC started making television programs.
Really? Sure.
And it happened in 9 months. Remember a guy called Gerard Vivier, who was a rugby commentator, and he eventually got throat cancer and died sometime in the 90s. But he, along with two of his colleagues, was sent to Germany. That's why we got the PEL system. They were sent to Germany and given this instruction, learn how to make TV and come back and make TV. So that's why we got TV in such a hurry in 1976.
And I remember it so clearly.
It was a complete reaction to the Soweto riots. But it also meant that communication and media, suddenly it wasn't free, but you had a lot more of it happening in South Africa with this new medium called television. And internationally as well, obviously it came to prominence. But within the ANC and within the politics of the struggle, there was now a new hard resolve. It's now war. It's now an armed war, and a decision was made by Oliver Tambo to make it an armed struggle. And this is what they did. And songs came out of that, and songs directly calling for action, not only protest, not only passive resistance, but actually go and find yourself a gun and do something about this situation. One of those songs is Sibushia Abazali Ikaya, which basically extols the youth to leave their parents, leave their homes, go and get some training, and come back and change this country with a gun. So Washia Abazali Ikaya, leave your house and do something about the struggle. This is the power of music in our country, and it's gone in the 20th century from those early songs like Dipping in Durban saying, look, this isn't right what you're doing, to laments and prayers like Nkosi Sikelele, to songs to expose the situation, like Batlele Bonke, which came out in the 60s in reaction to the Robben Island, the detention on Robben Island by the leadership. So the music evolved with the politics, and the uses of the music changed as well. And the 70s and the 80s saw the spectre of deaths in detention more and more. More and more people under the state of emergency were going to prison and not coming back, or dying under very mysterious circumstances. And it was not only black people, it was white people, it was Indian people, it was coloured people, it was people across the spectrum. And on that particular score, obviously a lot of music has come out protesting that, and also lamenting the whole tragedy. And there's a song called Njamblo, which is an adaptation of originally a hymn, which is Walk in the Light of the Gospel. And this is particularly poignant because it was sung by death row prisoners, political prisoners, as they went to go and be executed for the freedom struggle. The most unbelievable injustice and the most unbelievable poignancy. This version is sung by condemned men. You are hearing the voices of dead men. This is Njamblo.
It's so difficult to listen to music when you're telling such a sad story.
And that is so poignant because those are condemned men, and they would sing this, and they would walk to what was known as the hang pole, which is in Pretoria Central Prison.
Njamblo.
Njamblo. No, Njamblo is not the hang pole. Njamblo is the name
of the song.
But this was the song. You remember the movie Dead Man Walking? It was our Dead Man Walking song. It was one chill.
It's hard going back, eh?
Yeah, it is hard going back, and you know. It would
not
be
an easy path.
It would be most disingenuous of me to suggest that the struggle and the use of music in the struggle against apartheid was entirely the province of black artists. It wasn't. White people, because of various reasons, because we'd achieved a comfort zone, because of fear, because of ignorance, because of many, many reasons. Meaningful white protest music didn't emerge in the 60s. Didn't really emerge in the 70s. It only the late 70s where there were two breakthroughs on two fronts. The first was this guy who originally came via Rhodesia, but he was born in England, and he was this cocky youth, and he just was interested. He was fascinated by African culture and African music, and so he made his own guitar. He wanted to be a maskandi, which is a wandering minstrel, a Zulu wandering minstrel, and so he wanted to make his own guitar. So he did this. Very brave as a teenager, and he wandered off into the leafy suburbs of Johannesburg. And you know that sound you sometimes hear in between mealies, that ding 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 ding. That is the maskandi. And they will walk around, and it's a wonderful and noble thing because they're telling the story of their lives. It's their calling card. My name is Johannes. I come from Ladysmith. I've got 2 cows. I work for Crown Mines. I'm looking for a wife. I like acid jazz. It can be anything like that. It's the long story of your life. So Johnny Clegg, not knowing what he was doing, he just took his courage in his hands and thought, okay, let me give it a try. He immediately attracted the attention of the local champion. It was a guy called Sipho Nkunu, who thought, who is this upstart? And so they challenged each other to a guitar duel. They became friends, and they sweated, and they formed a band called Jaluka. And obviously a young white guy and a young black guy singing African music, singing about the dignity of African people, and on one of their early albums they even touch each other. They're touching each other. Can you believe it? The government were incensed, and they tried everything to suppress Jaluka, but they couldn't. and they didn't. And it started a movement of courage, and it started a movement of crossover music in this country where what people suddenly realized, hang on, there's something here, and there's something powerful here, and we want to hear about it. Of the many songs that Jaluka produced and Savuka produced, one that has been played a lot, especially with the death of Madiba last year, is a song called Asimbonanga, which says, where is he? Where's our brother? You know, why is he being kept away from us? But it also laments deaths and detention of Stephen Biko, of Victoria Mthenge, and of Neil Agate. All of these brave fighters against apartheid, and all of them who paid the ultimate price. And Johnny Clegg and Sipho Nkunu were very, very brave in releasing this song, because it broke all sorts of laws. It quoted banned people. It called for the release of Nelson Mandela. You know, there are very few things you could do more other than actually start planting bombs.
So how did the officials respond to it, Sean? I mean,
well, they were so scared of it that it didn't get airplay. And the SABC in those days had a wonderful way of censoring things even if they weren't censored. They would go and they'd scratch records. They'd send some arbitrary civil servant in with a sharp object. And this happened to Rodriguez. That's why you never got played on radio. And they'd actually destroy the master copy. So if some DJ foolishly enough wanted to play the song, he couldn't because it was scratched. So they would do that. All sorts of underhand tricks. And the song was more or less banned from South Africans hearing it. But it didn't take very long for us to hear it.
But we all knew it.
We were in a world of media, and we were getting imports, and we were getting T-shirts, and we were watching TV, and stuff like that. You just couldn't stop things at that point. So the song was very powerful, and still is very powerful. It's a wonderful reminder of who we actually are, and the price we've paid to be who we are.
Laphe hleli khona
Asimbonanga
Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona.
Oh, the sea is cold and the sky is grey. Look across the island into the bay. We are all islands till comes the day we cross the burning water. Asimbonanga Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona. Asimbonanga Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona. A seagull wings across the sea. Broken silence is what I dream. Who has the words to close the distance between you and me? Asimbonanga Mandela thina laphe khona laphe hleli khona. Asimbonanga.
oh, that's a beautiful one. Asimbonanga. Johnny Clegg, you know, it was going around YouTube a lot after Mandela died when Johnny Clegg was standing on stage singing this song.
In France.
And was it in France,
In-
Sean?
in
And then all
France.
of a sudden, Mandela walks
It was the
onto
most
the
amazing
stage.
thing
I mean, he's calling him, and he came.
It happened in
Oh,
this
God.
French town on the same night that I think Prince was also playing, and Prince was only half sold, and Johnny Clegg was sold out.
Really?
And
Oh.
the most amazing moment, actually Madiba walks on stage and
Yeah.
starts dancing, and
There
in
he
his
was.
shirt, and there he was. Yeah, it's truly amazing.
Very special.
But it was not only Johnny Clegg that was trying to do stuff. A movement of very, very brave, very funny, and I don't know how to describe them without swearing. They're wonderful people. I lived in the Oval with many of them. It was the Full Frame movement. And it started off with two journalists, really. It was Ralph Rabi and André Latour, who went on to become Johannes Kerkorrel and Koos Kombuis.
Yes.
And they happened to, by mistake, swear on stage in Bloemfontein. And this changed their destiny entirely. They stopped doing concerts to aunties at the FRK and RTK here, and they had started doing the campus tour instead, because they'd already burnt their bridges. And they were completely seditious. They complained about everything. They complained about their parents' generation. They complained about conservatism. They complained about boredom. They complained about the price of beer. They also complained about the politics, and especially about national service, which young white South Africans had to do. And they were very powerful. Another member of that Full Frame movement was a guy called James Phillips, one of the most talented musicians we've ever had in this country, who died tragically in a car accident. And he came up with that song, Remember, Home Fas Corporal, which was deeply seditious, because guys in the army used to sing this quietly, you know, and it's saying like, stop national service. My dad's still doing his camps, and I'm in the army. Try and work this one out. So the Full Frame movement did a great deal as well.
And again, I mean, were there restrictions on their songs and performances?
Yes, I mean, they were harassed by the police. But then it started getting a momentum, locally and abroad as well. And suddenly mainstream well-known artists like Anton Goosen, who was the sidekick of Sonja Herold, and they were the closest we had to ABBA in the 70s. They wore white, these dorky white outfits. And they had songs like Trein na Mandjiesfontein and Harlequin, and it was all very sweet, and, you know, like line drawings of Table Mountain and poinsettias, and it was a wonderful fairy tale. But he realized at some point, he had this road to Damascus experience. I can't do this anymore. Things are very, very wrong in my country. And so he started a band called the Commissie van Ondersoek, which in itself was provocative, because there were lots of commissions of investigation into what the government was doing at that point, like the Harams Commission and all sorts of other stuff. So it was a hot potato, especially coming from one of their own. And they produced songs like Die Winde van Verandering. The winds of change are blowing across South Africa. We can't do anything about it. He himself had to go to exile and go and hide out in Paris for a while, because he got the death threats. But nonetheless, the point was that mainstream South African society, first through the youth, and then through people that actually voted and bought things and expressed their opinions, ordinary people, suddenly started changing. And we started realizing things are deeply wrong. Something must happen. Nelson Mandela must get released before he dies in prison. It has to happen, or else the inevitable will go down. You know, the country will go down in flames and in blood. And what happened in the 80s, we all know. We know how the talks started covertly in the mid-80s, and then how suddenly that announcement came, and the ANC was unbanned, and the Communist Party was unbanned, and Nelson Mandela was going to get released. And guess what? We're going to have elections as well. It was the most momentous times. The world went topsy-turvy. Internationally, a lot of international pressure had caused that moment, especially sanctions. Now, artists like Jerry Dammers of The Specials in early as 1983 released the song Free Nelson Mandela, which was a huge hit. It all led to the 1988 Nelson Mandela birthday party. And that was seen by billions of people across the globe, and it was a 24-hour event. So for 24 hours, most of the world was watching a simple message from their icons. Everyone who was anyone in music was saying, Free Nelson Mandela. Not now. Don't talk about it at the United Nations. Tomorrow. You know, we don't want your oranges. We don't want your gold. We don't want your nonsense anymore. We are going to, we want to see Free Nelson Mandela, or else it is a non-negotiable, your future as white South Africa. And that's what happened. In sanctions, the ANC acknowledges that concert was probably one of the most significant cultural events in hastening the end of apartheid. And it all fell apart in 1989, 1990. Isn't that wonderful? And then we had elections 4 years later. And that's why you must vote, actually. Yes. Because all of this work brought you to the moment that you can actually choose your government. Exactly. And a price has been paid. And the song that I'd like to end off with is a protest song, and you'll know it. And it also has the distinction of being voted the most popular song in South Africa in the 20th century. So it covers all the bases. It was written by a national serviceman called Dan Heyman, He was sitting somewhere on the border thinking, what am I doing here? I really do not understand what I'm doing. And he imagined that he could hear the sound of weeping coming from the townships and the sound of the whole nation sobbing, the country subconsciously sobbing at what was happening. And it's not the roaring of war, it's not the posturing of apartheid, it's actually the dull murmur of weeping. So here's Bright Blue with Weeping.
Was the shadow of the demon he could never face. He built a wall of steel and flame, and men with guns to keep it tame. Then standing back, he made it plain that the nightmare would never ever rise again. But the fear and the fire and the guns remain. It doesn't matter now, it's over anyhow. He tells the world that it's sleeping. But as the night came round, I heard its lonely sound. It wasn't roaring, it was weeping. It wasn't roaring, it was weeping.
Yeah, it's also one of my
Now,
favorites.
Nikki, you hear that part that's playing now? That was deeply seditious. That was the one song that would set off the nationalist government in the 80s, and then managed to sneak it into that song. The major hit.
Beautiful, beautiful. Sean, I've so enjoyed this trip down the pathways of our very interesting, dark, difficult, filled with blood and suffering history of our country.
Well, the thing is, it's not history. It's real life. It's what we are now, and it's what guides our choices. And that's why music is important. It records what someone felt in 1926, and you'll find that it's a lot like what you felt now. Nothing really changes in this world.
We all want the same, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, it's the 7th of May is around the corner, and you're going to be called to vote if you are 18 years old or older, and this is your opportunity to cast a vote. And you know, you can sit here and, I mean, you said, where do you vote? Where do you cast your vote? I think a lot of people are thinking that way, but if you just listen very closely to what Sean was saying, many people have died, they've suffered, they've given their lives so that we in a very free, democratic South Africa can cast our votes. I say go,
Yeah,
vote,
and
vote.
my
It's your
advice-
responsibility
My
to do
advice
so.
is vote on the issues, not vote on the people, or vote on blindly follow one party.
Sean Brokensha, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Conversations with
Thank you,
Niki.
Niki.
That's been great. And thank you for joining me. I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. I look so forward to being with you same time next week. From me, Niki Seberini. Goodbye. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.